Video is going to present. Oh,
And we are live. Welcome to this conversation that I am having today. I'm Robin Holland, and I'm having a conversation with Brian Shulman, who is the producer of the BTS Presents show. And we're having a conversation today about a very fun subject called Teri's Find. Brian?
okay. Stand by. My name is Brian Shulman. I am the producer of BTS Presents.
Maybe she's lucky, or maybe it's divine. Have you heard the story about Trucker Teri's Find?
Teri, I want...
Okay, Robin, back to you.
All right. So I am going to unblue box myself here so this can go back and forth. So Brian, you made this movie about Teri's Find, which at the time when I first saw it, I didn't know what this conversation really was even. But you made this. You learned about this painting that Jackson Pollock maybe painted, and there was a controversy about it. And you made this movie. Tell us about how you got started working on that.
Thank you, Robin. I want to clarify a few details. I'm the producer of the BTS Presents show in Santa Cruz at Community Television. It's a nonprofit local access station, and it's a local access production. Teri's Find is a drip painting that Teri Horton purchased about 20 years ago in a thrift store that is no longer in business. And years later, she has been marketing it, producing videos, content, 60 minutes production called Who the Bleep is Teri's Find? Oh, Who the Bleep is Jackson Pollock, as well as David Letterman, Jay Leno, and a few other shows. She has worked diligently over the last 20 years to authenticate it, and the Pollock Krasner Association, the board that verifies Jackson Pollock paintings, was never able to verify that this was in the list of paintings that had been produced by Jackson Pollock. There has been significant work done by Peter Paul Bureau, a art expert and a authenticator of paint samples and fingerprints expert, as well as research in the industry for verification. However, some of the art experts dispute the authenticity. That's kind of where we are at this point. I found an interest in the subject and decided to get in touch with Teri and do an interview. So we're going to be watching a little bit of some of the excerpts from that video, as well as some authorized use of the Who the Bleep is Jackson Pollock video that we have permission to use. So while Robin and I are having this conversation, I'll be interjecting with some video clips that we can watch and discuss. Back to you.
Yeah. So that was the whole thing is just really interesting. I have to have a burning question here. Like, how did you find out about this in the first place, Brian?
Well, many years ago, I had the pleasure of watching on television on PBS Who the Bleep is Jackson Pollock, which was fascinating to me, and it seemed pretty obvious to me from what it said that it was an authentic painting. And with all the work that's been done since then, it's no longer a concern to me whether it is authentic. What I've come to understand is that the industry likes to verify something's real. But I think that it's really more important that the industry would be verifying that something's not real. And I don't think anybody's actually able to achieve such a thing. And now, I don't even think it's really relevant whether Jackson Pollock actually painted it or not, although I think he did. That's besides the point. The question now is, who wants to own this Teri's Find painting? This painting that's been in the marketplace for more than 20 years. that has had a video produced about it, that's had international news produced about it for 20 years, and is a high-profile piece of art.
Yeah.
I don't think it's even relevant anymore who the actual painter was, regardless of whether I believe Jackson Pollock painted it or not.
Yeah. Well, tell me, like, how big is this painting?
Well, let's not get into the details of that at the moment. Let me flip back to my screen share and show you a little bit about this video, which will answer some of those questions. But if you really want to get the details, all of that's available in the video, which is on YouTube, Vimeo, and Dailymotion. Look up BTS Presents Teri's Find, and you'll be able to watch the full video with all the details of the specific questions.
Yeah, well, just tell me, like, isn't it a big, like, it's a big piece, right?
Okay, hold on a second, Robin. The answer is right here in my video, which I'm showing you right now. So just back it up a second. Okay.
Can you tell us the dimensions of the painting, please?
68 inches by 48.
Very large painting. Teri, is the thread count of the canvas consistent with other canvases?
Yes, it is.
Okay, was this painting that you have ever restored or cleaned?
No.
Is the paint consistent with previous or subsequent paints?
Yes, it is.
Are the brush strokes consistent with other canvases?
There are no brush strokes.
There are no brush strokes.
No. He drip painted. He poured painting. He didn't use a brush.
That's right. He didn't use a brush. He used sticks. He used trowels. He used a number of things. He poured the paint on his canvases, correct?
Right. He used turkey filters and, like you said, stick tubes of paint that he would squirt the dot and get those kind of patterns.
My home is in Springs, East Hampton, Long Island.
Okay, back to you, Robin. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. It's just when, 68 by 48, that's a big, wide painting that would sit on a, big wall like this, a museum kind of big size painting, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay, well, so tell me what you've done with this. You made this video. You spoke with Teri Horton, and so now what's the situation?
Well, I've been in communication with Peter Paul Barreau, who is one of the foremost experts of this particular painting. He's done extensive research on the paint samples, on a fingerprint that he's found on the back of the painting, and matched up with a can of blue paint on the shelf in Jackson Pollock's studio at the Pollock Krasner House. He's done research and verification of the fingerprint itself with one of his associates in the Royal Mounted Canadian Police, I guess, who is a fingerprint expert, and he's matched up the bifurcations of the fingerprint. We've been in conversation with one of the collectors of Jackson Pollock. We've been in contact with David Geffen, who was the owner of the most expensive Jackson Pollock painting ever sold in history, number 5. And I'm going to show you a clip right now, which is going to show you how the two paintings are similar. We can talk a little bit about that in a moment.
Yeah, let's look at that.
So stand by.
It has the same type of swing of the paint, so on and so forth, that many of the others do. But the Pollock Krasner studio there, where Helen Harrison takes care of his stuff.
Tell me about the International Foundation for Art Research, the IFAR.
Somebody sent him a painting that they painting was in the catalog resume, and he just wanted to see how good they were, and rejected it.
Okay. How about
so let me say something about that. Here's Peter Paul Barreau, but let me say something about the IFAR. The organization that has been Jackson Pollock experts over the history is no longer connected because they feel that they've already researched and reviewed all the Jackson Pollock paintings. However, since they disbanded, a few Jackson Pollock paintings have come up, like Red, Black, and Silver, which was has now been authenticated as a painting that is not in the list. But the IFAR wasn't even able to authenticate a painting that was in the book, in the list of paintings. A painting was sent to them to verify, and they disputed it, even though it already was in their list. So the organization is no longer able to discuss Jackson Pollock paintings, and there really isn't anybody else who is authentic to be able to do so. Let's go to Peter Paul Barreau here for a second.
Paul Bureau.
Oh, he's a great guy, forensic scientist. Loves his Joanna, who's his wife, and he loves doing his work.
On his own, he traveled to the small Long Island town of East Hampton.
The best way, really the only viable way to interpret evidence is through its relationship to its environment. This is plain, old-fashioned forensic approach.
So I'll
Pollock's
speed through
studio
it.
is basically...
So while we're not listening to it, I'll fast forward a little bit so you can see this, and I'll narrate what we're seeing here.
Okay.
He took his camera, and he went into the studio to look for paint samples, fingerprints, and what he found was a match on the floor with gold paint on it. And gold spray paint was one of the things that was used at that time. And there's little gold flicks of paint in the painting, Teri's find, and the gold paint on the matchstick that was from the floor of the Pollock Krasner house matches the gold paint. As
like
well
in a chemical way.
In a chemical way, absolutely. And the fingerprint that was on one of the blue paint cans on the shelf in the studio matched the fingerprint exactly. However, and let's stop here. Let me back this up so you can see this in detail, and we'll listen to it as well. All right, so let's listen to this here.
Is that on the front of the painting? Is it on the back of the painting?
Right, on the canvas on the back.
It's on the back of the canvas.
Right, on the verso, as they would say.
Okay, and it's my understanding that there are fingerprints on paint cans that
Right.
Jackson Pollock used. How did you have that fingerprint checked out?
San Bernardino Sheriff's Department fingerprint deputy come out and look at it.
So you called the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department.
So that they were definitely print.
So let me say something about this too, Teri. At this point, one of the issues that has come up is that there's some question as to whether Peter or Paul Barreau had put the fingerprint on the painting himself. But what Teri's saying is that years before she even met with Peter Paul Barreau, she had that fingerprint verified by the police in San Bernardino. So there's no way that Peter Paul Barreau could have put the fingerprint on there. So there's been a question as to whether the fingerprint size is too big because it came from this paint can match sample, but the paint can has a fingerprint that's very large on it. And the point is that when you squeeze your finger onto a blue paint can with paint on it, that the fingerprint expands.
Yeah.
As well as the paint can itself had a label on it, and when Peter Paul Barreau was doing his verification, he was trying to pull the fingerprint separate from the image of the label so that you could separate the two and verify it. So he went through some technical computer use, and some of the questions is whether he doctored the fingerprint to make it match. It's up for discussion, but it's really not a concern to me. There's so much yes that there's not really my concern about the details here. I think that the art experts are not interested in considering some of these aspects. But let's go back to the sample that we're watching in the video.
My point being is that Paul was accused of having applied the fingerprints. The Sheriff's Department had already looked at him long before he ever had his hands on the paintings.
We had the painting laid out on a table with some lights.
Look, I believe it's a Pollock. How am I going to prove it? I've photographed the painting in many details. I started taking paint samples. Then I turned the canvas around, and right there on the back of the canvas is what appears to be a fairly clear fingerprint.
Now that he had a usable print to work from, Bureau needed a print to compare it with. Finally, on a privately owned Pollock painting in Berlin, he found an apparent match to the fingerprint on the back of Teri's canvas. Bureau, who couldn't justify the discrepancy in size, was at a temporary dead end.
About a dozen.
So let me fast forward a little bit.
In a showcase. I have found.
Let me just fast forward so we can get past the detail here.
All right.
So he gets to the blue paint can. He finds the sample that matches because he was very familiar with this fingerprint. There it is.
Yeah.
Now let's listen to what we
The
say.
fingerprint-rich characteristics can be seen more easily. Fortunately, through digital image processing, the background could be extracted. I also adjusted contrast, brightness, and gamma so as to display the rich characteristics with the greatest clarity. Through this kind of methodology, I was able to see that there was a perfect match between the fingerprint on the back of Teri's canvas and the blue paint can from the Bella Krasner house.
To verify his results, Bureau enlisted the services of Sergeant André Turcotte, a fingerprint expert who for 15 years was in charge of the Montreal Crime Lab of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Turcotte demonstrated that the branches of the ridgelines, called bifurcations, are the same on both prints.
An examination like this, it's easy to say that it's a real match.
You're sure?
I'm sure.
On the left is the fingerprint from the back of Teri's painting. On the right is the print from the can of paint in Jackson Pollock's studio. The bifurcations described by André Turcotte are outlined in yellow. And when the two prints are brought together, it is apparent they are one and the same.
I mean, so when you think about it, there's not a lot of question when you look at it from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So basically, there's a painting with unusual origins found in a thrift store, and for decades now, it is real, has what looks like really legitimate proof, fingerprints corroborated by people who use fingerprints for finding criminals. And so from that standpoint, it looks like we have real evidence here, and yet the art world is still like not able to say, and the people who, well, anyway, so
let's
basically
not talk
we've
about
got this awesome painting.
Robin, it's not about the art world. It's that there are some people who don't want to consider fact in their evaluation. We're always referred back to the conversation from the opening of the book Blink, where a piece of art in a gallery entrance feels like it's not real, and so many people feel it that it turns into research that verifies it's not real. Here's an opportunity for us to consider that this is a time when a piece of art has been fairly authenticated as real, and the art industry tends to want to stay with their feeling that it's not. But let's go to the next piece where we talk about the paint sample itself.
That was embedded in paint from the Pollock studio floor. When you look at the underside of this match under the microscope, what you find is a large particle of gold paint. We know that Pollock used to spray paint. And when you do that, these very tiny microscopic airborne particles can travel. And it will deposit on the walls, on the floors, ceiling, whatever objects are inside that studio. So I started to look at samples from Teri's painting very closely under the microscope. This is about a 400 times magnification on Teri's painting. On the surface, you can see many, many gold particles. It's just covered with gold spray paint.
When British scientist Nicholas Easthoff, a colleague of Bureau's, compared the paint on Teri's canvas with the paint on Pollock's floor, he found the same chemical component in both.
The conclusion has to be that there is acrylic both in Teri's painting but also in drips on Pollock's studio floor that can be tied to his drip paintings.
Now let's talk about this for a second, Robin, because that's a fact. documented, verified, authenticated, and recorded in an interview. Now, one of the things that's happening here is that this person who we just saw, who said that there's acrylic paint that's a match scientifically, has now said that he doesn't feel comfortable having made that statement.
Oh, really?
And that's one of the disputes that's been plagued in this conversation, is Eastoff is now saying that he can't stand by what he just said, which is that the acrylic paint in the painting and that matches the sample that was on the floor of the Pollock-Krasner house is not necessarily authentic. And I feel that it was pretty obvious what we just saw.
So, you know, we've said two things here, Brian. We've said we have all this evidence that this is the real thing, and that it doesn't matter if it's the real thing or not, because it's a really very interesting piece of work with a story around it, and it looks like a Pollock, and it probably is a Pollock, so let's find who wants the Pollock. And
well, no,
it up on
not the Pollock, who wants Teri's find, because I think it's no longer relevant whether it's a Pollock or not.
Okay.
But I think there's enough preponderance of evidence that I feel that somebody who's interested in owning this painting would want it because of the preponderance of evidence leaning towards the fact that it is.
Yeah.
So let's go a little bit more. The video itself has a little bit more material that I think is interesting enough to share. So let's take a look and see what comes up next.
Okie dokie.
To do 60 Minutes, the gal that was taking care of it was Helen Harrison. Anderson Cooper, he interviewed me for that, and that was fun.
You were on the David Letterman show also. Is it true that painting number 5 looks somewhat like your painting?
Well, if you put them right next to each other, you can't hardly tell them apart. They just blended right in together, and you couldn't like I said, you couldn't hardly tell them apart, but the colors were different.
The value of this number 5, do you know what number 5 sold for, Pollock's number 5?
Well, they say it sold for $140 million, but nobody can really trace it down. Martinez says that he doesn't have it, so nobody knows where it is, really.
Oh, interesting. Are you familiar with the painting Red, Black, and Silver?
Let's talk a little bit about what red, black, and silver is so that it makes sense to the conversation.
Yeah, good idea.
Red, Black, and Silver was the painting that was owned by Jackson Pollock's mistress at Lee Krasner, and she, Ruth Kligman, I'm sorry, and she passed away before the painting was able to be verified as authentic as well. Since then, they found a hair from the rug on the floor that matched the hair in the painting, and still the painting has yet to be authenticated.
You know, I remember reading something about that. It was like polar bear rug or something, right? So it's not a kind of average acrylic fiber. It's something way more specific.
Right, and once again, it isn't relevant whether it's real. The question is, who wants to own that painting?
Uh-huh. Yeah, who does?
Well, there are people who want to own it.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been able to be auctioned off as far as I know as of yet. Let me go to the video and show you what that painting looks like. I don't think you could see it here. Memoir of Jackson Pollock on the cover.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, what's interesting about this particular painting is that as the history continues, the research behind these stories starts to become much more relevant. Even this particular painting, they had radiograph images verifying the age of these paintings. And art experts that were involved in verifying. But once again, it's not necessary to look into the details of accuracy of authentication. The question is just who wants to own it. These are some of the experts involved in this authentication conversation.
Uh-huh.
There's a movie with Ed Harris. Did a great job. Here's a little bit of an interesting conversation. Let's stop this video and back it up a little bit, and we'll let this roll a little bit and hear what this is talking about.
But is factual.
Who's Nick Carone?
He was in the movie, and I met him when we went to the premiere. He said, "Hey, girl," he said, "don't give up." And I said, "I won't." And the boys were smart to tell him not to commit himself.
The American artist Nicholas Carone was one of Jackson Pollock's closest friends. Historians referred to Carone as a primary source and foremost authority on the subject of Jackson Pollock.
88-year-old artist Nick Carone, a friend of Pollock's, remembers the day 50 years ago when Jackson finally sold his first big work.
He comes on beaming, like that, you know, and he said, "Well, tell us, did you sell the painting?" He said, "Yeah, I sold it."
Sadly, Carone passed away in July 2010, but in a 2011 interview, Carone's twin sons, Claude and Christian, confirmed that their father was advised to keep his true personal opinion to himself in order to play it safe and avoid unwanted attention. Christian Carone said it was his doing. Both sons confirmed that the father, Nicholas Carone, told them that Teri Horton's painting was a real Jackson Pollock.
Right.
Claude Carone, he told me he thought it was real. Christian Carone, he thought it was real. I told him, I think it's real.
He also said the film's comparison to Pollock's No. 5, 1948, owned by David Geffen, particularly worried him. In Teri's film, when they spliced the painting from Geffen and they showed her with hers, it looked exactly the same, in a way that it could have been a spliced painting. I think that that painting was cut from some other painting.
But Horton's story may not end here. In a book by Deborah Solomon, Jackson Pollock, a biography, the author interviews Pollock's widow, Lee Krasner, who tells the story of Pollock's No. 5. That story is told a number of times by different sources, among them Pollock's dealer, Peggy Guggenheim. Apparently No. 5 was sold and delivered to Alfonso Osorio, damaged, who then wished to have it repaired. Pollock repaired the painting and returned it. Solomon's interview with Lee Krasner tells a very different story, but describes the painting as a red painting and as a canvas. But the No. 5 we know today, previously owned by S.I. Newhouse and later by David Geffen, is described everywhere as a painting on fiberboard, and when examining it, it cannot be described as red. Krasner stated it was returned because of a scab of paint sliding across it, distorting the canvas. According to Krasner, Pollock created an entirely new painting. She screamed, Osorio's painting no longer existed, and when Carone saw the montage of the Geffen No. 5 and the Horton canvas in the documentary, it was like one painting. It looked exactly the same. Is Carone suggesting that the Horton painting is a canvas No. 5? And Pollock just cut off the offending part? Edge to edge, including the stretched and folded parts, the painting is approximately 70 3/4 by 51 inches. The stretched work measures 66 by 47 5/8 inches. According to her book, Solomon was given unrestricted access by Lee Krasner to Pollock's papers, and Eugene Thaw, co-author of the Pollock catalog Raisonné, gave Solomon permission to quote from these papers. No. 5 is a 4 by 8 foot painting on fiberboard and not a painting that can be described as red or on canvas.
On the left-hand side of the screen, we see a detail from Teri Horton's painting. On the right-hand side, we see a detail of roughly the same size from a Pollock painting entitled No. 5. When you put these pictures close together, what we end up is an image like this. And I tried putting several areas taken from different areas of both pictures, and I end up with the same result. Which is which?
So once again, Robin, I feel that we're pretty much in a unquestionable nature of conversation.
Yeah,
with
really.
So much fact, and still it's not even relevant whether it's real. The question is, who wants to buy it?
Right. Yeah, so my question is...
Currently, we're in communication with some art experts in the Netherlands who are interested in working with us to continue our project, and I feel confident that we're likely to get this resolved this summer.
Awesome. That's awesome. So, what's next?
Well, what's next is to market the painting. I think that one of the things I can do here is I can show you something that I created, which is, let me just see if can you see this? Are you on screen share here? Desktop, screen share.
We are seeing your screen.
You see my screen there. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right, so I'll read it to you. Teri's Fine for sale to highest and best offer. Best known from the classic movie Who the Blank is Jackson Pollock. Fingerprint identification and paint pigment analysis authentication by Peter Paul Barreau. As his quote, I adjusted brightness, contrast, and gamma as to display the ridge characteristics with the greatest clarity. Through this kind of methodology, I was able to see that there was a perfect match between the fingerprints on the back of Teri's canvas and the blue paint can from the Pollock Krasner house by Peter Paul Barreau.
Yeah.
To verify his results, Barreau enlisted the services of Sergeant Andre Turcotte, a fingerprint expert who for 15 years was in charge of the Montreal Crime Lab of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Turcotte demonstrated that the branches of the bridge lines called bifurcations are the same on both prints. An examination like this, it's easy to say it's a real match. I'm sure. Andre Turcotte. Teri Horton is the sole owner. There are no encumbrances. We are willing to agree to a release of ownership of the painting known as Teri's Fine to allow the potential purchaser or financier to arrange a sale, distribution, or auction of the painting upon written release by all parties. Below are the URLs for the BTS Presents Teri's Fine, a recently released 30-minute update on Teri's Fine. And for more information, you can contact me. I also want to say that now that we've created this Google Hangout from today's conversation with you, Robin, I feel that we're able to include the link to this Google Hangout for interested people to watch. And I thank you for making this presentation with us.
Yeah.
While I'm finishing this conversation up with you, I'm going to watch a little more of the video and see if there's anything else I feel like we could share.
Okay. So just to reiterate, for anyone who is interested in learning more about this, two ways to contact you are to either call or text you at 917-693-0649 or email you at btshulman, SHULMAN, @gmail.com.
That's correct. And in the video presentation I created, there's another email that's also available, bshulman@hotmail.com. Clearly, Robin, if anybody contacts you and you'd like to speak to them about it before they reach me, that's fine. Teri is available to have any interested party get in touch with her lawyers in New York and work out a contract for arrangement. The painting is available for physical viewing. It's in an art warehouse where it's available to be seen.
And
where
is that?
It's in California.
Okay.
But the painting is available to be moved. When it was moved to California for the Jay Leno show, and when it was sent to New York for the David Letterman show, it was in transit with security and had been insured for more than $10 million each time. So we know that insurance houses consider it to be worth at least $10 million, and we agree.
Awesome.
Let me run a little bit more of this video here.
Bye-bye.
Maybe she's lucky, or maybe it's divine. Have you heard the story about Trucker Teri's Fine? Fine. easy to prove her pain and true. A world full of experts, and she could see right through. Yeah, she found another way. A knight in shining armor, riding a horse called DNA. Yeah, Da Vinci or Michelangelo. It's not a Pablo Picasso, Rembrandt, or even Van Gogh. I know she's finally found it, been on a 10-year rush to find a home for the painting whose canvas never felt the brush.
And the credits roll.
It's important to run the credits here that we're doing because those are authenticated credits for the who the beep is Jackson Pollock video that we use.
Right.
Thank you, Jackson Pollock.
And then, of course, we have some
local advertising
video credits from using the CTV station.
Yeah.
Sponsor ads.
Right on.
And justifying what the purpose of CTV is for public broadcast. Some spots from some local advertising for the Restore, which is a Habitat for Humanity store that sells their materials for providing housing for some of the underprivileged. And then, of course, we want to thank Community Television of Santa Cruz for making it possible for us to be able to produce this show there.
Yep.
And
that's awesome.
Then here you can see where some of the recent episodes of the BTS Presents show is available to be watched.
Okay, that's good.
And these are credits from the crew that worked with me on producing the BTS Presents Teri's Fine show.
And our beautiful Pacific Ocean.
And just in a second, when that's finished, I will roll off and come back to the screen.
Okie doke. I come from the world of movies and TV and game production, and we always stay for all the credits. So.
Right. All right. Well, I want to thank you for allowing us to have this presentation. I think that it's been very useful and productive, and I thank you significantly for the opportunity to create this production with you to support our efforts. And I hope for the sake of all people involved that we're able to bring this to a close. Teri is now more than 80 years old, and we'd really like to allow her to release the painting to its new owner, into its new chapter and history, and move on. She'll get her piece that she's always been waiting for, and whoever the new owner is, they'll be able to move forward. I believe that what's likely to happen is that Teri will sell the painting for her minimum required comfort level, and the new owner, whether they are an investor that wants to work with an auction house to sell it to the highest bidder, or they just want to hold it as a collector, I think that either way it's going to be a historical move in the new development of the art industry, considering the expertise of authenticators, fingerprint, paint samples, and sometimes subjective views of people's opinions isn't the only way that we make decisions today.
Yeah, well, it'll be a great moment when this painting is found by the person who very much wants to have it and can appreciate it. It'll be a good day for Teri and for that new owner or collector. So I'm looking forward to seeing that happen and glad to be part of that process.
And one last thing, I just want to let you know that being that we're in the process of working with Teri to find a buyer, we also want to recognize that with the support of the participants that are involved in finding the buyer, putting together the buyer with the seller, there will be a compensation arrangement that will be shared by those people who participated. And I just want to let all the people who watch this video know that if they feel that there's a possibility that some involvement could help us put together the buyer and the seller, that the compensation is possible for that to be shared amongst the people who participate.
So please contact Brian or me if that's something that you can play a role in.
Excellent. Thanks, Robin.
All right.
We'll get in touch.
All right.
We'll talk about it again soon.
Sign off now. I'm going to stop the broadcast. Bye, everyone.